Hi, everyone. This is Tom Cronkite with CertifID, and I am excited that we have a special guest with us, Josh Douglas from Mimecast. A few housekeeping things, and then we're going to jump right into it because, like every other monthly fraud briefing, we've got about 5 pounds of sand to fit into a 3-pound bag. So Josh and I are going to work through this as quickly as we can. Today, we're going to talk about some practical steps and tools that you can take to actually lower the risk profile through layers of technology and both employee and consumer awareness or customer awareness, depending on what industry you're facing. The other thing I'm excited about is we have many different industries on the phone. So this is a grouping of not only our customers, but also some of the Mimecast customers as well. So welcome, and I hope you find this worth the time because that's the most precious thing we could take from you for the next 45 minutes. So myself, I'm a co-founder and CEO of CertifID, a recovering lawyer, wire fraud victim, and we're just on a mission at CertifID to really protect the payment ecosystem as it relates to large payments, wire fraud, and ACH. Josh, so I'll, in the interest of full disclosure, Mimecast is a vendor of our companies, both SunTitle and CertifID. We're a huge fan of their product because it actually works, and we're super excited that Josh, who is the VP of Threat Intelligence, but what that really means is he is the guy that's working between the lab teams and the tech teams and the product development teams to make sure that their solution is keeping pace and is relevant in market. So Josh, how did I do there?
You did awesome. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So we're going to jump in and like I say, and if you have questions, the last housekeeping thing is I'm distracted now. The last housekeeping thing, if you have questions, put those into the GoToWebinar bar because we are going to leave ample time to go back and dive deeper into a topic that you'd like to explore further. So here's the agenda. It's a packed agenda today. We're going to talk about what's trending like we do each month. We're going to walk through this idea or concept of the layered approach to security. And then Josh is going to dive into this concept of how do we move from just noise or chatter into actionable intelligence that we can use to lower our risk profile and make our companies and our customers more secure during the transaction process. And he's actually going to give us a live example of a recent company profile and talk about how fraudsters are profiling and targeting organizations based on their level of cyber risk. I'm going to share some examples of email monitoring and analyses of our organization to show you peaks and valleys of what bad actors are trying to do, kind of knocking at the door, and then an action item regarding the workflow. So while that was a mouthful, here are some current stats. So what we've seen, we have a lot of reports that have come out the first quarter of this year regarding business email compromise and phishing and malware and those things. We're going to pull out phishing because for a lot of us, and I think Josh, you'll agree, our employees and customers and vendor partners tend to be the weakest or the most exposed link, and they fall prey to phishing. And because of that, we really do track these. 76% of all businesses were saying, yeah, we were part of some phishing attack, not just attempt. We've all seen attempts, whether or not we recognize it, but we're talking 3/4 of the business population. The FBI IC3 report, the Internet Cybercrime report came out a few weeks ago. We're now tracking 13.7 billion in business email compromise. Remember, business email compromise is the specific type of fraud that they're tracking because it relates to the diversion of payments in the stream of commerce. But also know this is about 15% of what's actually happening. So 15%. So 85% goes unreported if you look at the number another way. And then saw the stat this morning, and I had to include it. 4.9 billion robocalls were made last month alone, which lended itself to just under 15 per American with a phone number. And I've noticed that on my cell phone is I'll get a call and it looks like it's coming from a local number, maybe where I have an office or where I live, but I'm not expecting that phone call. And Not some of those are just genuine market solicitations, but some of those, I think up near 40% have some type of malicious attempt. And then the attack trends are moving a little bit as well, or quite a bit. So there's an 81% increase in financial account takeover, where they're trying to get into bank accounts or wallets or things on a digital basis. But look at this trend, 211% increase on mobile. So as this mobile phenomenon and just frankly the functionality of our mobile devices increases, they're pivoting to that device more and more each year. 45% growth rate overall on attacks, and then they're always after kind of the login sequences. So quickly, some of the things that we're tracking and that are kind of concerning, and this isn't meant to be 45 minutes of just, hey, scare me to death type thing, because we're going to talk about some practical solutions, but you do need to be aware of these. Social engineering on mobile, they're running vishing and voice smishing. I mean, there's all these different acronyms that describe them now, but they're using social engineering to try to get into the mobile device deeper, even app cloning, where you think you're on your banking app or some secure communication app, and it could be redirecting that traffic. Social testing for social engineering, this has been kind of fascinating, because they're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to run this A/B kind of testing sequence to see hit rates and response rates and open rates and click through and all these different things. And they're doing it to really create this really highly tailored, pitch perfect engineering socially, to make sure that your employees are seeing the most believable version of an email for them to immediately kind of, in their minds, credential, and then the fraudster takes them down the rabbit hole of what they ultimately want. And again, you guys know I'm an optimist, and those of you I haven't met, I am an optimist, but at the end of the day, these are kind of the threats that we need to continue to manage. And we'll get into some spoofing examples in a second. So what Josh and I are going to do is kind of walk through at a high level this idea of a layered approach to security. So if there's a vendor partner or a consultant or somebody that comes into your office and says, you know what, I got a silver bullet, because if you do this one thing, then you're not going to have an attack, your people are not going to get tricked, and you or your customers or your vendor partner ecosystem will never lose a dime. And I would just tell you that I firmly believe that is just simply not the case. What I do believe is that we all have a standing risk profile that is rather high if we're not doing anything, if there's no education or awareness or technology. And we can start to layer in through different segments to lower this risk profile. So the first segment would be hardware, for example, and I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but proper routers and firewalls and intrusion detection. And then it moves to software, software like Mimecast has with email monitoring, and updates are so critical, because a lot of times, guys, they're updating for a reason, not because they're giving you more free stuff for the same price. They realize that there's a hole in it that's been exploited, and they need to patch that hole over. So updates, and then virus detection, so that things aren't infiltrating your system. Josh, anything you want to add on the software piece before I move on to people?
Well, maybe one thing. I mean, having sat in the role as a CISO before, I can tell you that passion goes a long way when it comes to slowing down an adversary. It's somewhat seems like it's time consuming and tedious, but the return on that is significant enough that it does minimize the risk and is a value add to every company, and something that they should focus on a day-to-day basis.
No, good point. And then people. So our weakest link, frankly, in the chain tends to be our people and our vendor partners. And what are we doing to educate and kind of get a state of the union of the vulnerability or susceptibility that they may have on clicking, through emails or links or things like that may be, nefarious, but they don't look like it coming in. And then the end state is this creating a culture of compliance and curiosity, where we're just a little more I guess, questioning, if you will, before we just open up attachments and random emails. Processes. So taking a clinical look at your internal processes. What about payment controls and data access and identity verification and the ever important now incident response? That if a payment is diverted to a fraudulent account or there is a breach of the perimeter of the system, what is the protocol? What is the sequence to react as quickly as you can and methodically as you can to mitigate whatever harm may be facing the organization or the employee or the customer? And then Josh is going to talk about this, our partners. So, hey, I'm doing everything I can internally. I'm fishing, I'm educating, I'm showing examples, this and that, but man, it's this doggone, and you can fill in the blank. This partner I have that, is small and doesn't get it, and we've had many instances where it seems like their emails have been compromised. They don't do anything about it. Well, guys, we have to do more as organizations to protect ourselves from that threat, because that is going to continue to be the strategy. Is if they can find an ecosystem and the partners in it, they're going to identify those that are the weakest link. Josh, anything to add before I roll you in on the next topic?
Yeah, I mean, I love this chart, especially from the aspect of the people and the processes of what you can do directly every single day, because that is the last mile inside of your company. Security awareness training is an extremely important aspect when it comes to making sure that your people are engaged and they understand security. The processes are just as important, and they may seem overly simple and common sense, but seeing time and time again where those processes break down because people aren't following suit on them, and thus there's financial losses in the company because of it. And when you do an after action review of an incident, often it comes down to those two things: people and processes that failed. And basically the security aspects, when it comes to software and hardware, they're doing their job. They're not going to be the fail safe. Really, the people and the processes are at the end of the day is what's going to make that happen. And when it comes to your partners, and you think about that, you've amplified your security game, having seen this, firsthand, that basically the attacks will trend off of you because you become a more resilient target. And basically your partners become that soft, chewy center that they want to go after because they know that they have a direct connection with you. And I was super excited about this whole event because, when Tom and I talked, my wife actually is in the business around real estate and title closings. And I've seen this firsthand where basically these processes fall down and partners become the weakest link in financial loss.
No, and we were talking about before, Josh, the broadcast started, that this is a journey. There's no end state to this, correct? I mean, we're going to continue to have to educate and really challenge these layers with new technology and strategies to keep pace with the evolution on the fraud side. So the ideal state, guys, is not zero. I want to mention this. It's not zero. It's a manageable state. You're like, boy, that's kind of a bag of hot air. What's the deal? It's because there's no 100% certainty. But to Josh's point, if you're up here, right, you're going to be the target. If you're down here, in real estate terms, do you want to be the house with the front door that's cracked open, or the house with the chain link fence and the lights and the Rottweilers out in front, right? So that they just move on to the next target because you have done the work, you've made the investment. And I will tell you, putting my legal hat on but not giving legal advice, courts are weighing in on this issue right here. They are going to start to deconstruct from a best practice standpoint what you did or did not do or should have done, frankly. That's common knowledge within your respective industry segments that could have either prevented or mitigated the loss. And you're going to have to stand account now if there is a diversion or there's some type of financial or other burden or loss that somebody experiences. You're going to have to be able to document and show that these things, at least at some level, were in place. So, Josh, I'm going to hand this over to you, and just let me know when you want me to advance the slide deck.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so I think collectively, like with everything in our lives, the more noise that we have, the less likely we are to understand what things are important. And The unfortunate circumstance is that as a security vendor, or a partner, we often want to throw a lot of things at you, be it, more alerts or more threat intelligence, but ultimately, what that provides is a lot of confusion versus what's the most important thing to go after, like Tom was just laying out, like the sequence. Tom, if you go to the next slide, please. And when you start to think about, threat intelligence as a whole, and the indicators of compromise that you may get, really that's post-breach threat intelligence, which means that you're already compromised or you're in the process of being compromised, and that's probably not the state you want to be in. And what happens is even when those indicators are provided to you, you may not have the right equipment to be able to ingest them. You may not be able to go and search for them. You may not even have the staff necessarily to go through all these steps. So what you need to start thinking about is a different approach on how you consume threat intelligence. And there's actually two forms of threat intel. There's a standard threat intel where I look at an attacker's arsenal and I try to understand what they're going to shoot at me, or how they're going to compromise me in some approach. But at the end of the day, there's another type of threat intelligence called counter intel, which is even more effective, which means I need to understand my risk and how an attacker views me, like what Tom laid out a second ago, which is understanding the things that they're going after. So if we go to the next slide, Tom. Which means that can drive actionable items. And that's what I consider to be truly actionable threat intel, which means that you're going before you actually get compromised or actually being targeted for compromise. Next slide. So we take the same mentality when we look across our entire portfolio of partners and customers that are our heroes because they're on the front line every single day. And we looked at the attacks that are coming at them. And what we found was very interesting when we saw the number of unique attacks, meaning things that are coming at them that are not being caught by commodity antivirus scanners, other threat intelligence that's getting indicators of compromise. And if you click the next slide, Tom, what we found is the ones that were getting targeted most were those third parties or basically soft, centers that don't have the resources necessary, to defend against this. And then if you look at the other side of the spectrum on the left-hand side, you start to see the whole thing transition. That's because the attackers have started going from this mentality of target their primary target first and actually going after third parties, which means that you're a link in that chain. If you're actually a shop that either has taken somebody that has been working in operations, made them an IT person, or maybe you're actually in real estate as a whole, and you're basically are your own IT person, or you're actually kind of cobbling it together on your own, you're a primary target for these individuals because you provide financial gain for them or even intellectual property. Next slide.
So we're going to get into an example now, Josh, where you're going to do a case study on an actual manufacturing firm. This is fascinating. So I'll let you run here.
Hey, no problem, Tom. Yeah. So, and we can just fast forward. I'll explain it in a second. To the next slide. So we had a customer that we looked across manufacturing. In the previous chart, you saw that it was large on the scale as being targeted. So we looked at manufacturing and said, well, that's interesting. They're the biggest section here across our customer base. What's interesting about this? Well, it jumped out to us immediately when we looked at the number of unique malware samples that were being sent. Mainly, we're going to a couple customers, and one in particular, this customer X. And we thought to ourselves, well, maybe it's the size of the company because they are pretty large. So go to the next slide. And what we found was that when we took their users on average, compared it to all of the other people in that same sample set, they still were getting targeted more than anybody else on a per user basis, which kind of made us scratch our head a little bit, like, why is that happening? And we started wondering, well, could it be that there's some other external factor that's causing this? So we go to the next slide. We looked at the data itself to understand, well, what are they being targeted with? So we took the mindset of, let's look at the first set of intel that I talked about, understanding the attacker's arsenal. And what was unique about this is that all the samples that made it past, standard AV or basically other scanners that are commodity that most anybody can buy, but before they were caught by Mimecast, we ran them across another threat intelligence vendor to see if they recognized these samples and were able to target them right away. And what's fascinating was that only 10% of them were actually found. The other 90% weren't. So we had to go and look at all these various different metadata components and understand exactly how they were related. And what we found is that we found all these unique pieces of malware that are polymorphic, which means that they're changing or the actor's actually changing them. So that way they can go after these targets. Next slide. But that doesn't really tell you anything at the end of the day. I mean, it doesn't tell most people anything at the end of the day. So we started trying to understand what was the intent, like what were they actually trying to do? This manufacturer actually has a lot of connections, be it across, government or, other businesses. And what we found was interesting is that they were trying to supplant what is called, a Trojan, meaning that basically they could create a backdoor, they could have lateral movement, meaning that once they're inside, they can move anywhere inside your company. And it also allowed them to steal additional information, like passwords. They could actually grab information around, around bank accounts, and then they could utilize that information against other, other targets or other businesses. So next slide. So that was fascinating, but again, I don't think it still tells you, the customer, the business owner, the IT person very much. So what we wanted to do is kind of put that counter intel mindset on and say, let's go ahead and look at it from a risk standpoint. Why are these lean IT targets being compromised, or at least being targeted to be compromised? So we found that, that there's some reasons why. So we went ahead and circled, well, what's one of the big ones? So next slide, Tom. So one of the reasons why is that all these larger, companies, let's say if we think about real estate and we think about the banks have a lot of money. It means that they have a lot of resources too. So they've already facilitated a lot of defenses. They've amplified the game, which means it leaves everybody else on the outskirts as a third party. So to them, this is a business as much as it is an opportunity to make money, because they've already invested time and effort in creating these pieces of malware, which are their toolkits. And in the process of going to one of these big targets, a larger company, a financial institution, they could potentially lose their IP, their intellectual property. So if we take a moment to think about that, like, okay, well, why does that matter? And I'll give you a use case. So I had been working an incident before where we found an attack and we're watching it live stream. And in the process, we made some changes. We actually waited and made some changes across the board to block this threat actor. And we kept watching them. They actually had another backdoor that they were using too. They started changing the malware, pulling tools off of their tool shelf and putting them in on the fly until they were able to get by those additional, security mechanisms we put in place. And that's interesting because if you don't take the efforts to amplify up enough, they already have something right there to be able to get right back in. They also have the opportunity to impact you directly on a daily basis. So next slide, Tom. So we kept that counter intel mindset and went a little bit further. We wanted to know, who are the targets? Why are they being targeted? And how are they being targeted? So in this case, this is out of our product. We looked at all the impersonation attempts that were coming in. It happened to be that they were using an American Express email account to try to target salespeople. So that's interesting. Maybe they were trying to send them, updates on their expense sheets, or maybe they're trying to get the manager to click on something. They are also sending it to the chief operating officer, who could have, maybe been in charge of the finances there at the company, as well as dealing with American Express. All very fascinating. They know their targets, and they also know the kind of things that they do, which means they're not only going to impersonate people inside your company, like your CEO or your COO, they're also going to imitate and basically impersonate individuals that you do business on a daily basis with, third party. And Tom and I were talking about this because I mentioned my wife is in this business, and I had been pulled into a security incident, through her or one of her clients. And the attack that I saw was fascinating, because what I saw was that the realtor in this case, had been compromised and basically facilitated a simulated, wire transfer, because they copied the entire template of the realtor, got everything set up the way that it was supposed to be, because they were already in that email account, and then sent it along, and the processes failed in that mechanism because it wasn't stopped in that entire chain of events. So we go to the next slide. So let's take it a step further, and let's talk about some actionable things that you can start to do, and you'll start to see this in a moment. In this particular case, this customer had a lot of employees that had been using their email addresses in LinkedIn and Facebook, their business email addresses. It had been linked into this trick bot and basically spread out everywhere. So it wasn't that the company was compromised. It was the fact that there was bad behavior, or at least a bad process that was put in place where company or business activity was being extended into their personal lives. And I know that this is often hard for smaller companies because they may only have one email address, and they may use it in their personal life, they may use it in their business life. But I'd highly recommend that you think about this for a moment, because what transpires is in the process of one of these companies that you can't control, Facebook, LinkedIn, or any other social media platform out on the planet, if they get compromised and those passwords get lost and you use the same passwords and the same email addresses there, they're going to be used against your business accounts. And you may be using Office 365, or you may be using Gmail or something like that. Now you've just extended the problem of that compromise that was out of your control into your business life and now into your downstream customers. Next slide. So it's all about digital fingerprints, and you need to think about the things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis and who you're interacting with and how you keep some separation between those two. Next slide, Tom. So in this case, with our customer, we went back to him and gave him some recommendations. We said, hey, look, here's some accounts that we found compromised. Go ahead and force the password changes. We also recommend that if you're super paranoid, you can go ahead and change all the passwords, so that way any of those that are getting targeted, or being sent phishing emails, you can go ahead and just put them into the dumpster and go with a new process after you started training your staff. You can also put things like, MFA in place. That'll raise the bar a little bit. If you're not using like Google's Authenticator or Microsoft's Authenticator, that's an option that you can go with. There's plenty of other options out there. We also went back and said, hey, look, we're looking at all the exposed email addresses that you have out there. You need to actually come up with a process and a follow through with your employees. And what you need to do in that vein is start to get them engaged. So, in Mimecast, we have our own security awareness product that we use, and we engage with humor and micro trainings. These sort of things are helpful, especially if you have a large staff, and get them engaged. But on the other side of that, not only did we give them action items about the things that had transpired up to that point of all these things that we were seeing, but we also talked to them about the user behavior that we were seeing in their company. And the chart on the right-hand side is extremely interesting, because what it shows is that orange line was the customer. And it means that their company was clicking on bad email links far more than anybody else in the Mimecast population per user, and far more than even in their own industry, which means that they had two things colliding, basically outside forces that they couldn't control with bad user behavior, which means that they were getting targeted a ton, and then it had the opportunity to, with a lot of risk, to be able to click on things. And Tom, I don't know about you, like if you're seeing this sort of thing happen too, but didn't know if you wanted to weigh in on some of that.
I want to go unplug my server from the wall. That's all I want to do. No, I'll show you some examples. We actually thread in the first 4 months of email traffic and behavior, but I will echo in the same thing, that's a bad trifecta. If you've got curious people in a bad way that are clicking on everything, you're going to get singled out as a target. The last leg on that stool is you're going to have more instances where they're knocking on your door. I think that's a scary graph right there.
Yeah, so I don't think that was the last chart, Tom.
You have this dashboard here. I'm curious if you can walk them through this.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry. And now the gratuitous product discussion. So when we think about this at Mimecast as we're moving forward, and how we're changing our evolving thought around this, is with our threat intelligence view, is that what we want to provide our customers at the end of the day are actionable, items that they can take advantage of. Understanding your risk score compared to everybody in your industry against your overall, user base, making sure you understand which users inside are the most risky, as well as some of the things that you can do collectively, like turning on security features maybe you're not using. So if you're a TTP user today, and let's say you're using attachment protect or URL protect or impersonation protect, making sure you have some of those things turned on collectively. I mentioned your third parties, for instance. So impersonation protect, if you haven't loaded in third parties that you work with, that gives you an opportunity to look for, phishing emails that are coming in and impacting you. We want to be able to provide you things that help you before you get to the point of post-breach threat intelligence, and want you to be out of the noise. So next slide, Tom.
That's your last one. We're going to move into the graph. So I will echo this, and I'll give some examples of how we've optimized the Mimecast product suite in our organizations. But here's an example of some of the reporting that you can do. So one of the main components that we use with Mimecast is this idea of email monitoring, and we've worked with their team to optimize it. So think about this, guys. Let me speak to the real estate industry on the call for a second. We've taught on these key words that you can pick up on that should be red flags. The word kindly, the lowercase I to signal someone, on a possessive, like describing that person. Any like change or update followed by wiring instructions. So all these sequences we've actually loaded in. And so think about how granular this is. If an email comes in with a space followed by a lowercase I and a space, it automatically gets flagged. It doesn't go to our employee segment before IT reviews it. So we can get that granular to show that, hey, we can pull some traits out from what they're doing. So this is a live report. So I co-own Sun Title along with my partner, Lawrence. And just in the first 4 months of this year, we had roughly 1,093,000 emails that went through the system. Almost to the number, 10% of those were rejected and flagged for either being malicious or potentially fraudulent. But what's interesting is they know our industry, okay? So you think about Trid Tuesdays and kind of funding Fridays and Thursdays leading up to that. Look at these spikes at the beginning of the week. So look at, you're a Tuesday. Here's a weekend where, Josh, you and I were talking about this. They may be running different testing, or depending on the country that's coming at you, they're trying to make sure the email lands, or they're just working the weekends. I mean, look at this Thursday spike here. So just know, guys, I don't believe anything is coincidental. I think they're refining and honing their craft relative to the industry that they're focused on, right? And as you go through, even you look at the timing, that those hours between like 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock Eastern have more velocity than the mornings do of those Tuesdays and Thursdays. Because what do they want to hit? They want to hit the employee that's just getting hammered that day, not because of anything everything's out of their control. It's just one of those sideways days, and they just want them to not notice or slip up, click on the email, or rely on something that they shouldn't. So let me just dissect last month, because the market's getting busier, right? I think we got pretty compelling evidence here. Look at that. Thursday spike, and then we don't have to the month end here. But you can see, and then they're running even Trid Tuesdays, and Mondays ended up being a little bit higher. So just know that. I think this is pretty good evidence. And here we're running still just under 10% on a flagged rate. Now, if you don't have a system like Mimecast, all of these, so that would have been an additional 110,000 emails that our people would have had to not only spend the time combing through, but it would have had to get every one of them right. Because you know what I didn't get last month? I didn't get a message from our IT group saying, hey, we got a bunch of really good emails relating to closing disclosures and settlement statements and funding that didn't go through, and it started to screw up some deals. Not one. So all of these are bad. And what Mimecast does, because of the consortium kind of intelligence that it has, is that it starts to log that they start to see patterns, and they add additional layers and insights to filters before we're even seeing it. Meaning, hey, Amazon or Microsoft or some other big company is starting to see this trend, it would flag that trend from that source or however they do the wizardry that you do, Josh. It's amazing.
I like to call it community defense. So we love that aspect of the fact that we have, a SaaS-based platform that can pull all of this together comparatively to anybody else in the industry to be able to give you that type of result.
Yeah, and it's not expensive. So there's my plug there. So how are they coming in? So let's use some examples of just how they're coming in, because like I say, and Josh mentioned, it's starting with really well-crafted phishing. And they're piggybacking on brands of trust. And guess what? You're a brand of trust within your little microcosm in the markets that you serve, especially as to your customers and vendor partners. So while these are some of the most well-known brands across the country, they're doing more of a micro attack to say, hey, I just have to get in this transaction ecosystem that might only include 8 people, i.e. the real estate transaction. And I only have to be right once to compromise an account, Josh, to your wife's example, and then someone's going to believe that because they were the information was coming from an account. So how do they get account access? This is the old, remember the Nigerian prince that lost his uncle, and then if you would just, accept 10 million over the weekend, he'd leave you $1 million. If you could just kind of wash it through the U.S. This is where phishing started, going back into the early 2000s. People still fall for this even today, but it's next level right now. So just know it's coming in forms of not only corporate, but also personal phishing scams because they're targeting your people. If they can get to the personal side, then they're going to migrate, to Josh mentioned, they're going to migrate over into the corporate ecosystem. So here's one from the IT desk basically saying, hey, we've got a problem. I need your user credentials to complete some update. Next one is anything electronic document related. That's a real challenge that we have right now, especially in the real estate space, because we share surveys and HOA dues and, frankly, purchase agreements. Almost every MLS has adopted one form of electronic delivery system for those documents. So I'm not saying we can avoid those, but we have to be very suspicious as we open those. Banking. So here's, hey, all bad things happen unless you confirm your account because you're not going to have access to your money. And just, you got to unpack these. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but you have to unpack and have changes. I call it that the smallest nuances in emails matter right now. The capitalization or lack thereof, the sentence structure, the timing, to Josh's point, the timing of a communication. We train our people. Do you normally get a closing disclosure on a Sunday morning from that lender? Or does that, real estate agent normally communicate with you at 3 in the morning saying that we just signed this purchase agreement and I'd like you to start the title order? You have to think about that.
And Tom,
this was the number. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, on those, given that, all of your work lives on this phone, I'm sure, revolve around mobile devices too. We often see at the top subject line inside of a mobile device, the name, and it's very easily masqueraded, on mobile devices now today for somebody to become somebody else. Just quick, make sure that username matches up with the email address as well on your mobile device if it's coming in at an odd time, because mobile devices, having done my own research on this, mobile devices are accounting for at least 50+% of the clicks that are happening on malicious links. And it means that in our fast-paced world, sometimes we have to slow down just a little bit to validate.
No, that's so true. Good point. This was the #1 phishing lure from last year, and it was just a generic invoice. So this is industry agnostic. This doesn't matter if you're in manufacturing or you're in IT or you're in healthcare or you're in finance, whoever's on the call. This is coming into someone maybe in your production group or your finance group or accounting or whatever it happens to be. And Josh, you've forgotten more than I'll ever know about this, but just by even hovering over long enough, they may be able to gain insights and then drop a little something into your system that is not good. And clicking on it could mean things even worse as that attachment opens up and it starts crawling around into different areas of the platform. Josh, anything to add on just attachment links?
Yeah, I think you're pretty spot on that. I mean, it goes back to the tracking aspect too, and not to add more scariness to it, but often what they'll do if you have, auto images turned on, meaning in your email client that you automatically download pictures, they'll use that to track on whether or not you opened up the email, and will continue to keep trying to send you stuff. So like at my own house, and my wife and I talk about it, like if she doesn't know the sender, it's not a expectation, just delete it. If it's important, they'll call you. Like, the phone actually is a savior. Like, we still have this great communication device that we can use as it goes beyond email as well. So.
No, that's so true. Deactivation notice, but this is coming from some aerospace. This is that kind of hover over state that you can do not only on the desktop, but also on mobile, but they're also coming through the social platform. So here's an example we just wanted to call out from somebody's LinkedIn account where Wells Fargo is asking them to take some action relative to their account, right? That is not going to happen. It's just simply anonymous. You have to think, have they ever responded like that or communicated like that in the past? And the answer would be no. So main takeaways, again, the layered approach can just reduce, just from a probability standpoint, the instances that you may face as an organization, because it's a slow caribou theory. They target the people that are the most exposed, that are easiest to pick off. And to Josh's point, this is not only a conversation internally, it's really a conversation with the entire ecosystem. We had a lender that, Brent, was it 3 times? I've got my IT manager in the studio here as well. 3 times their system was compromised, and we received fraudulent CD and wiring instructions that were either sent to us or sent to a buyer for cash to close. And finally had to stop doing business with that lender because they just couldn't get it together. There was too much risk. And look, I don't like to close the door on revenue opportunities, but at the end of the day, you just can't do that. So we have to have those hard conversations. Time does matter. I think, to Josh's point, timing is one of the best lines of defense. I'm going to get into that in a couple minutes. And then using technology, guys. Technology at scale creates so many efficiencies and also creates the risk reduction that you just can't train enough around from a statistical standpoint to have the security layer and the performance that these well-honed technologies, and those are always moving and adapting in real time. Just an investment we have to make. So I want to talk to you about risk reduction in the workflow. I'm going to use this as a real estate centric discussion, but for those of you in other industries, I'd like you to use this as more of an example of how we could unpack the workflow of a normal transaction, especially as payments and information flows, so you could see the parallels. So let's take the buyer side of a real estate transaction where this is residential and there's a mortgage lender involved, okay? And you can see that on average I'm going to peg it at about a 35-day transaction cycle. There's 2 hot spots that you have to recognize in the real estate transaction. First is I list Josh's house as a real estate agent, and I have to activate that listing on the MLS, right? I have to do that pursuant to my board rules. Well, when I do that, it syndicates everywhere around the country, around the world, frankly. It goes to Trulia and Zillow, and it's everywhere, right? So the whole world knows that Josh is selling his house, and I'm the superstar agent that got hired to do that. So 2 days later, or 2 minutes later, depending on what part of the country you're in, Josh accepts an offer, and we have a buy-sell accepted, and now I have to go in and I have to move the active status to a pending or an active under contract, depending on the state. Guys, that click, that switch becomes the deal board or the beacon that the fraudsters are tracking in the real estate industry, because it publicly shows that we went from an active and now we are currently under contract, and it starts to give them the runway and the visibility to the ecosystem or the transaction partners they need to infiltrate. And then as we approach closing, that ever important, so you can think about this in other industries, leading up to closing or the full fulfillment of the contract and the swapping of the payment, right? And in real estate, that's closing schedule to full disbursement, the 3 to 5 day period. So here are some layered examples that you can use. Mimecast sits at a high level, kind of listening and monitoring and protecting as much as possible from even hitting the deck of the organization in the first place. Okay? So that spans the entire process. Then, especially in real estate, if you read the court opinions and what's evolving around the country, you have to have a notice in front of the buyer as quickly as possible. So we've now heard instances where within the first 3 or 4 days of a purchase agreement being accepted, not title order starting, purchase agreement being accepted, the buyer is communicated by what they think is the title company, but it's actually a fraudster. The fraudster has some amazing, language in an email, and their either earnest money deposit or entire cash to close amount gets wired before the end of the first week. And we are simply not prepared as an industry for anything close to that right now. And we've heard now 4 instances in the last 5 weeks of this taking place from different parts of the country. We're not even thinking about these transfers until typically the 3rd or 4th week. Then a refreshed alert, because there's a lot going on here. There's due diligence, there's inspections, there's lender's coming over to get a blood sample to make sure I can repay this loan. There's just a ton going on, especially for first-time home buyers. We have to refresh it when cooler heads are kind of checked in, and there's a lot of that we're on a little smoother glide path to closing to say, hey, we're approaching this time where you're going to wire in funds or transmit funds. Be aware of this. We help our customers do that. And then our product verifies identity in real time and allows for the secure exchange of that payment information. And we actually will stand behind each wire that's certified up to $1 million. So again, not moving it to completely mitigated, but taking it from a high risk to more of a manageable state. To the organizational owners on the phone, I'll say this. We talked about earlier that you're going to have to account for what you did, didn't do, should have done if somebody in a transaction loses funds. The idea, if you unpack the decisions and the opinions and the theories of cases and everything around the country, there are common denominators. Secure email, encrypted email is a common denominator, okay? The other is proper and timely notices to all people that this is an issue, what to watch out for, how to report it, and what you're doing to prevent it. And it's simply from everything I've read, and there are multiple, has been simply a lack of communication or transparency early in the process, even though we all know it, right? NAR puts out the bulletin, and ALTA, and the American Bar Association, and the mortgage bankers, everybody knows about it. But what are we doing to communicate that down at a ground level to the people that are actually targets? Because your customers are the target of a lot of these frauds. So, Josh, anything you want to add here?
You explained it perfectly, Tom. That was awesome.
Okay, and it's industry agnostic, guys. I was on the phone with a partner in a law firm, manufacturing customer, wires to a supplier. This was today's Tuesday of this week. And supplier didn't get the funds. Supplier saying, I'm not shipping the goods. And the company saying, well, I sent pursuant to the wiring instructions of the payment details that you gave me in the invoice. And it happens to be that the supplier's email was compromised. And now we're in this tug of war of, well, who's ultimately responsible? And you just don't want to get there. The seller side, so I know there's a little nuance on buyer side and seller side in real estate. There's still that same hot spot because there's so much information we can find online. But again, Mimecast sitting over and kind of listening and protecting the information that should not hit our people and our customers in the first place, but then a fraud alert, and then where certified can be used to identify individuals and payment credentials before funds move. All right, we're going to get to questions, and we have several. So our next set of fraud briefings look like this. We're going to go through some heavy stats in June. I'm going to unpack. This one's going to be fascinating. It's a ton of work, but I'm getting through it. What happened in the courts last year and what's trending around the liability if there is a payment loss. And it's been very interesting between the federal and the state courts of what's taking place. We'll have a guest speaker in September for E&O and cyber insurance. I can tell you something, guys, that industry is pivoting in real time around these losses because they completely, and they couldn't have estimated it right, completely underestimated the impact of social engineering and business email compromise. I mean, so I could go another hour on that. I'll leave it at that. And then you notice we're going to skip the month of July because everybody's going to be at the lake anyway. And then data security and best practices, we're going to drill into some of those things. And then November, we're going to set up for some really actionable strategic items, because a lot of times we have that, we're planning in December and early January. We want to help you plant some thoughts or seeds or categories of things that we should be thinking about taking on based on what we've seen in 2019, and things are trending in real time as well. So first question is, what is the ultimate reason for a robocall and what are they trying to accomplish? So I'm sitting at my dinner table about 9 months ago, and if you're trying to reach me on my home number, it's never going to happen because I've never touched that phone in 3 years, okay? But we still have one, and that's a debate I have ongoing in my household. So my wife we're finishing dinner, and she says, hey, do we owe the IRS money? I'm like, I don't think so. Wrote them a big check. She's like, well, we got this message on the machine, and it suggests you should listen to it because I think you need to call them because they're saying that litigation is going to start if you don't respond to this message. So I listened to it, and it's just like weird voice that sounds like they're talking out of a storage trunk. But anyway, what they're trying to do in that scam, and the IRS put out many bulletins on this. This is a robocall. This is a robo scam. It's a vishing using voicemail, and they're trying to get me to reply to a number. And the first thing that they would ask me, I guarantee, is, hey, say, to confirm your identity, please put in your social security number, because after all, we're the IRS. We're God, right? And you can trust us. So that's one example. But that's typically what they're after. They're after some type of user credential or behavior. Josh, do you know of some other specific examples that are trending?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number, and I mean, the technology behind it's getting better. I mean, you can almost not even tell that it's a real person on the other side sometimes. You actually hear some of that occurring even in the political, phone calls that you get nowadays with that technology. But it's really it's an opportunistic attack, kind of like what you're saying. They'll send it out to a broad number of people and try to gain a little bit of information so that way they can run with it. And I've seen that instance that you're talking about. I've also seen another instance where they pretend to be, tech support and actually say that they're calling in so that way they can get access to either your bank account or your system. So there's a number of mechanisms to do that. Sometimes it's a live person that's actually, they're in a call center and basically the robocaller calls you and then there's a live person, or it's a robocaller where it's actually fully automated. But it is that opportunistic attack.
No, I couldn't agree more. So again, guys, they're also using U.S. Postal Service. So we've heard instances where they are sending wiring information with the logo of the company, with the credentials of the deal, because they've logged in to somebody's email account after it's been compromised, and basically says, look, here's a number if you don't believe us, but here's the attached wiring instructions. We're looking forward to your closing. Don't trust anything else. And when you call to confirm, you're calling somebody that, to Josh's point, is speaking in just that dialect of even a specific part of the country. So if you're calling the Northeast, they're gonna have that Northeastern accent versus the South versus, I don't know what the Midwest is here, but I hear we have one. But that's interesting. So another question, Josh, this is to you. Are there particular countries or regions where fraudulent emails are originating more versus less?
I mean, there are some trends geographically, but as the attacks become more targeted, it's not really going to matter. Because they'll utilize servers here in the U.S., they'll use them in Russia. I mean, Russia, China, those places where there isn't as much control over, the impacts of the attack, or even the ability to prosecute the attacker. They'll originate out of there, but they'll actually make it look like it's coming from the U.S. So you can't trust the fact that it's coming from a particular country, that's going to be a stopgap.
We just recently put out a bulletin to our customers. I think it was yesterday or the day before. We've picked up 13 active countries in our system where they were trying to either impersonate or respond to identity verification and wiring credentials. So it's very active. It's all over. I'm gonna take this first one, and I'll let you respond, Josh, because I have a strong opinion on this.
Okay.
What would you say to those who say that 2FA, two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication, is too cumbersome? Here's what I would say. Let me explain to you what's cumbersome. You lose a couple $100,000. You have to sue civilly to get it back. You're called by the Department of Justice to testify live in front of a Nigerian syndicate, and you're wasting hundreds and hundreds of hours of your time, energy, and stress off your life through a process that you didn't cause, that you were drug into. So there's 30 seconds on our fraud experience. What I would say to those is, if it's too cumbersome to download an app that allows them to streamline multi-factor authentication, or it's too inconvenient that if they're in the, at the soccer field to put in a 4 or 6 digit code before they get into Facebook, then the alternative, I would argue, is just a matter of time, and they're going to experience the contra, and that's what happens when accounts are taken over. And if you're named in litigation, I got a call from a real estate agent last fall that said, hey, I need a good lawyer. And she was asking for a referral. We don't do this. But she was saying, I'm being sued because my account was taken over and a buyer lost $270,000 on a real estate closing here in West Michigan. So that, to me, real friction. And you know what, guys? This is industry standard. So I don't see it as a this or that. I see it as you have to do it. And if you don't, you're going to get absolutely hammered if somebody loses funds and you don't. And I know for the real estate or for the title industry on the phone, you'll say, hey, the real estate community is, they're kind of running more fast and loose, and they're either not aware of it or they're just kind of turning a blind eye because they don't touch the money. Look at the Bain case in Kansas. We wrote a white paper on it, and start to do a lunch and learn segment on what that case meant to the realtor, the realtor and the broker involved. Josh, sorry, I was long-winded on that one.
No,
that was a softball.
And what I would say is that, cumbersome or not, the technology has come a long way, and it's a lot easier to use nowadays. There's multiple options. But on top of that, kind of to your point, Tom, is that not only the downside of what happens after, but you're actually starting to see some of this traverse into requirements from various different larger companies. So having been a CISO at a larger company, that was one of the things that we used to ask on our, on our evaluation of third parties. Are you using two-factor authentication? Are you doing these sort of things? And you're actually starting to see them come in regulations as well, or even, a criteria for certification. So in particular, dealing with public companies, the SSAE 18 requires you to have that particular functionality if you're dealing with a public company.
Well, and I would say this, and guys, I'd love for you to connect and follow up with us on how our respective, servicing and offerings can come alongside in some of those risk profiles. I do believe that the companies that make the investments in the things that we're talking about today stand to gain substantially as we move forward and try to navigate these waters. I think we can turn cybersecurity and that investment into a branding opportunity where you can distinguish yourself in market because of the things that you can point to that you're doing, especially to your point, Josh, with the publicly traded banks and other institutions where this is not going to be optional anymore, and you're just going to get booted off a list because you can't meet the vendor attestation and requirements that they're requiring. So, Josh, anything else to add? Otherwise, I'll wrap up.
This is great, Tom. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. And thanks, Josh. Awesome content. I hope everyone on the phone thought this was well worth the time. Sorry we went about 10 minutes over. Everyone will receive a link to the live broadcast after it queues up, so probably a few hours from now. And I hope to see you on the next month's webinar. Until then, have a great day and stay safe.